First of all, Minister, in relation to asylum seekers, I think this country, one way or the other, whether a person is refused or granted, it is taking far too long. Those people are kept in basically locked up, you could say, with the way it's done. Minister, right around this country, and if you look at media reports in the last few days, some people seem to be making a business of going around the country trying to get hotels because of the financial gain that's out of it, to put it very bluntly. Can I ask you a question, Minister? Does your department, when agreeing terms with the prospective person that's going to our company, because it's generally a company that might have 5 or 6 companies turned around in the last year, do they check, are they planning compliant, the buildings that they are talking about? Do they check, is there recreation areas that those vulnerable people have facilities that are required for any person that deserves them? Are they fire compliant? And is it checked out? This is what I want to know. And if there's any legal challenges going on in the background, does the department check that, or do they just go and agree what's happening in relation to the facilities? Especially, I'm talking about the one in Refugee, Minister. Thank you.
In order for the state to meet its obligations as set down in the European Directive 2013-33 EU, which lays down standards for the reception of persons seeking international protection, and another SI 230-2018, the state must have sufficient available accommodation to meet the demand of persons in the protection process. Due to significant demand, my department has sought to identify additional accommodation by publishing expressions of interest in the national press, as the current accommodation portfolio will not meet the demand. It is in response to that expression of interest that the premises in Wicklow Town and elsewhere were offered to the department. So just to answer the question from Deputy Fitzmaurice, officials don't go around looking for places. They are offered to the department by the owners. As with all our accommodation centres, whether they are located in rural or urban areas, my department will work closely with all the relevant state agencies, such as the Health Service Executive and the Departments of Education and Skills and Employment Affairs and Social Protection, to ensure that the required services that the residents of the accommodation centre require will be available to them. All contractors are obliged to meet the reasonable transport needs of residents. Where an accommodation centre is not in place, where public transport is readily available, additional transport arrangements are provided in consultation with the Reception and Integration Agency. I must stress that transport costs are funded through the local community welfare officer or RIA as appropriate. The contractor of each centre will also be required to set up a Friends of the Centre group, as recommended by the McMahon report, to facilitate linkages between the residents and the local community to encourage integration, and my department will work closely with this group to achieve these aims. Now, some of the other questions that were asked. Yes, planning is checked out with the local authority to make sure it's compliant. Fire regulations, likewise, also checked out with the local authority to make sure it's compliant. Recreation areas are quite important, as Deputy Fitzmaurice has pointed out, and they are available. I can't answer any question about legal challenges, obviously. Deputy Brady asked about where others looked at. It doesn't work that way. The centres are offered. We put out a call for expressions of interest, and they are offered. And then, if they are suitable, discussions are entered into with the owners or contractors, as the case may be, to actually agree a contract to provide for the people. And I'm sure all of us here, and it has been said, are concerned about the people who come here looking for protection, and that's paramount. They're not Magdalene laundries. People are free to come and go, and I would really ask if we don't use that kind of terminology. It's not fair to the people living there that they be described that they're in holding camps or whatever. That's not the case. People are free to come and go. The accommodation is offered to them, so they don't have to take it up. And some of them don't. Some of them have friends and relatives that they stay with. So it's offered. And if somebody arrives into Ireland, Dublin Airport tonight, Cork Airport, wherever, any of the ports, and they say, I want asylum, I want to claim asylum here, they're offered accommodation if they need it. The alternative is probably being on the streets, and none of us would want that. Now, at the moment, we're at capacity because we have, this year, I think about 3,500 we expect to look for accommodation under that process. And that's why we put out calls for expression of interest, and then people offer the accommodation to us, to the department, to RIA. And it works like that. There is no plan at the moment to dismantle the accommodation centres that we have, because there's no alternative available. And if you look across Europe, similar systems are in operation in countries across Europe. And we have the McMahon report, we have standards, we have the Ombudsman and Ombudsman for Children going in to ensure that the standards are as high as we can make them. And we have also changed the law, as we know, Deputy Smarts alluded to that, to actually speed up the decision-making process, to get people moved through the system. And people, it's a movable number of people that move through the system all the time. People are coming in and leaving all the time, and we're doing the best we can to move people through as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Minister, thank you for your reply. First of all, Minister, are you or your department concerned, if you look around the country, that there seems to be a certain amount of people with their names attached to companies concentrating on this in supplying? And you're correct in saying it's not the department's fault, it's people that tender for it. But is there a concern there that there is a certain cohort of people that is looking to have a few of those, or 3 or 4 or 5? I welcome that you have said that planning has to be compliant, fire cert has to be compliant. But Minister, if there was, would you imagine that your department would check out if there was some legal stipulation on a place that was tendered for? Would the department not be worried in case it didn't work out? And I would presume they wouldn't sign contracts before they do that. Would that be the case?
District hospital issue. With respect to any legal issues, if the Deputy has anything of concern, we put it in writing to us, please. But I mean, these are rigorously checked out by RIA. But I want to thank you for raising this important topic. As I say, earlier this year, RIA published a calls for expression of interest in the national press for premises to meet the increasing demand for accommodation for persons in the protection process. I must emphasise that we've put out calls for expressions of interest. We don't go around, the department and RIA doesn't go around picking places and knocking on doors. This call sought expressions of interest from parties who may be interested in providing accommodation and related services on an urgent and emergency basis. This was issued in response to an unforeseen demand for accommodation and related services for persons arriving in the state seeking international protection. The criteria against which the department assessed the occupiers' accommodation were availability, standard of the property, availability to provide communal and social spaces for residents, ability to cater at meal times, and proximity to various other services. It should be noted that these premises were offered to the department by individual contractors across the country. The department did not randomly choose any one location over another location. It should also be noted that across my department's portfolio, there are a number of centres located in rural areas which are run successfully, with all residents having access to required services. Following on-site assessments carried out by staff in the department, the Grand Hotel in Wicklow Town, Cashlaw, Namar and Mobile and Shannon Key West Hotel in Ruski were deemed to be suitable premises. These premises are or will be available after refurbishment, capable of providing meals to residents, have scope to provide the required communal social areas required by residents, and are located close to other social services with the support of additional transport if needed. My department is engaged with the Chief Executive of the local authorities in each of the areas and has provided the elected members with information regarding the opening of the new accommodation centres. As with every other accommodation centre in the country, my department works closely with all other relevant government departments and agencies to coordinate the delivery of state services to residents. The Grand Hotel in Wicklow and Cashlaw and Mobile are contracted to accommodate approximately 100 persons for 1 year, pending compliance with all regulatory requirements. The indicative timeline for the opening of the centre is within the next 2 weeks. The hotel in Ruski is not expected to be available until later this year, after the completion of necessary refurbishment works. In order to meet accommodation needs in the longer term, the department has recently commenced a public procurement exercise under which public tenders for the provision of accommodation and ancillary services by way of the independent living model to personal protection process will be advertised. This process is scheduled to continue throughout 2019, completion 2020. This will be delivered via a series of regional competitions. Thank you.